Hello, my name is Gregory St. Cyr. I'm a staff engineer at USAA. My role is primarily on our bank cloud and enablement team. And today I'm here to talk to you about scaling resilience and our journey to business continuity in the cloud. As far as the agenda today, we're going to look at, our journey to cloud just in general for USAA and how that relates to our resiliency strategy. We'll go into the framework that we use to scale that resiliency strategy, and then how we get from our strategy to actual implementation and impact all of our application deployments. And then we'll look at an example of an application we deployed, and we'll talk a little bit about even how it worked during the outage last month. So what is USAA? So USAA is a financial services company, but we provide a wide variety of products across banking, insurance, wealth management, and most importantly, one of our products is customer service. The reason why I mentioned customer service as a product is because of our 14 million members, it is kind of the cornerstone of what we do, because our members, being service members and their families, they don't always have ready access to phone and internet based off of where they're at from a deployment standpoint, or just where they're at in their life stage. And so obviously for us, availability, especially resiliency, which we're going to talk about today, is really important to our mission at USA to serve our military members. So our journey to cloud for USAA, similar to a lot of companies. We started in 2019. We deployed to US East 1, like many companies do, with just a couple of deployments. Over the course of the next couple of years, it took us a little while to gain traffic, to gain momentum in switching to cloud, but we started to see that value. And so by June 2023, we had dozens of deployments that were in AWS on US East 1. And then we experienced our first, US East 1 outage. And so one of our mottos at USAA is never let an outage go to waste. So, we could have taken that as an opportunity to repatriate, but instead we saw the momentum, we saw the value in growing our platform in AWS, and we took it as an opportunity to mature our platform, and we enabled a secondary region. So we actually started deploying our applications to US West 2. And so today, even though through 2024, we had hundreds of applications deployed to AWS, and we had dozens now deployed to US West 2. And even talking about this recent outage that we had in October, it's another opportunity for us to learn and grow and mature our platform. Now that we decided to adopt this multi-region deployment strategy, our next step was to decide what type of failover patterns are we going to support from a USAA perspective. So this diagram may be familiar if you guys have looked, at the AWS resiliency pillar from the well-architected framework. But USA focused initially on the three on the left that I have bracketed here. That being, backup restore, pilot light, and warm standby failover patterns. The thing I want to highlight is that, for USAA, backup and restore, especially from a data perspective, is not optional. We can't fail over to our secondary region if the data is not there, not available. We have to have a process to be able to get that data to our secondary region, even if it is in a recover from snapshot type of deploy on demand mode. So backup and restore is not optional for us going forward. Pilot light and warm standby is where we start to get into, especially a lot of our high and critical applications that we rate. And we'll talk about that from an RTO and RPO perspective. But our goal for our application development with pilot light and with warm standby is to improve our RPO and RTO to allow for that resiliency, that customer experience that we need to provide to our military members. So understanding what these failover strategies are and what we can accomplish at USA is only the first step. So now we need to figure out how we apply that to application resilience. And the answer is in three phases. So we do that through first, architectural design. That means we assess each application and we identify all the dependencies that are associated with that application to understand not only for that application, what do we need to do to make it resilient, but any downstream dependencies that are part of the critical path to be resilient as well. We focus on incident response and our requirements around recovery to make sure that we identify what is the necessary RTO, and that's built into as a requirement to our architectural design. And then we look at those failover patterns that we just discussed to see which one fits best for that use case. Then in phase two, we focus on operational readiness, right? So what configurations do we need to account for when we're deploying that? What kind of playbooks and monitoring do we need to have available and ready for us to be able to hit those RTO and RPO metrics, SLOs for that application? And then in phase three, testing and feedback, this might be the most important phase, right? So going back to the phrase of let no outage go to waste. Similarly, we have to, test and we have to plan for those outages ahead of time. And then when we have those outages or where we're doing our resiliency testing, we have to learn from them and get that continuous feedback. So the retrospective analysis is important, both monitoring to make sure that we're meeting our SLO objectives for RTO and RPO, but also to improve the maturity of our platform, like we continue to strive to do at USAA. In order to position our developers to be more successful in building those resilient applications, we need to do more than provide just a high-level framework, right? So a couple of things that USAA did to kind of organize around and promote resiliency at USAA is through process and tooling. We started with, from a process perspective, organizing and centralizing resilience to make sure that we had a common set of standards and frameworks across our association that we could be confident in that would deliver to our objectives. Then we built out a distributed, DevOps platform. That both means from a tooling perspective and from a people perspective, making sure we're meeting our application engineers where they are from a DevOps platform maturity standpoint, to be able to walk them through and provide that consistency across all of our development teams. We also wanted to focus on training, right? So it doesn't do us any good to have a process around resiliency if we don't train all of our application engineers and our business partners on what the importance of resiliency is. So we based that off of the well-architected framework, resiliency principles, but then we dove deeper, which we'll talk about in a second, into how it was more specific, to make it more specific to USAA. We also, outside of just process, we looked at opportunities for automation to help our developers get through and build to resiliency faster, right? So one of those being self-service blueprints. So integration in our SDLC processes, whether it's in our pipeline or et cetera, to make sure that they have the tools available to them to be able to code for and test resilient applications. And then having infrastructure as code templates, so quick start guides that allow app teams to start development quickly and get those resiliency requirements built into, those NFRs built into the application. Some specific examples related to that process are, our custom well-architected reviews. So we started with the well-architected framework and we applied that to all of our applications at USAA. And we quickly realized that, there are some things, because of the way that we've structured our company, whether it's the centralization from a resiliency perspective, our DevOps platform, some of those things are consistent across all applications. And so in order to simplify and tailor it more specifically to how we've implemented apps in our app platform at USAA, we built our custom lens on top of the well-architected review, which gives us a better, more meaningful automated scoring that allows us to identify and highlight for each application, what are the components that they can control to help improve their resiliency. And then we focused on shifting left. So what I mean by that is moving our focus on resiliency further left into the design process, or further left really into the SDLC process. So as we get through ideation and we start to look at and think about how we solution to these these business use cases, resiliency, understanding our RTO is critical in that respect, right? So we had to make sure that we have that early validation to reduce churn and improve the way that we build to resiliency for all of our applications. And from a tooling perspective, we had a couple of things I'll give as examples of where we started to integrate with our SDLC process. And then I'll get into some of the things from a template perspective as well. So in our CI/CD pipeline, we use GitLab, but we've also started integrating, Resilience Hub and resource groups to provide insights to our application team. So when they run through those pipelines and they're deploying new changes, they can see immediate feedback on those assessments, whether it's from a Resilience Hub. We look at, what resources are deployed from a resource group perspective, and it gives us that evidence-based reporting to in a real-time manner show, how we're doing before we even implement to production. We can see this in our lower environment stages as well. And then a canary deployment strategy that we have automated through our pipeline also that allows us especially for serverless apps, which I'm showing here, but also for container-based applications, where we're able to weight routing to slow roll and provide more resiliency into that framework and into that SDLC process to test our changes and learn from them. As I mentioned earlier, is one of the critical feedbacks, right? To learn from what we're doing and understand the resiliency of our application as we start to roll it out to our members. The last thing I wanted to show you was some examples of our pattern library, which is comprised of 4 components. So these are the quick start guides that allow our developers to get started quickly, but also provide those non-functional requirements related to resiliency to ensure that there's consistency across the way we develop at USAA. So serverless patterns, we have examples like an async API or like a choreography pattern with like a vit bridge or a real-time API with orchestration with step functions. All of these serverless patterns are examples of how we provide these kind of quick starts for our serverless applications. And the same thing goes for containers in the way that we provide Helm charts as templates for the way we deploy those applications depending on the need of that app. And then from a data perspective, as I mentioned earlier, data is key. We have archival patterns, like I show here, the way that we can move data from our domain application VPC into a data VPC for archival. We also have automated snapshots and then restore patterns that we have across, whether it's from our archival data VPC or from local snapshots. How we recover from those patterns, from those where that data is, allows us to be able to safely move or be resilient within region or multi-region, depending on the application needs. And then the last component of our pattern library is the selection criterion. So we use these different selection criteria to help us identify which pattern fits best for a use case. And ultimately, and you can see some of it on here, whether it's reliability, performance, latency, sensitivity, these things are also very much related to resiliency and what we're looking for as far as how we implement consistency into our applications. And so we use that criterion to best fit our applications to the right pattern and therefore into the best resiliency architecture as well. So let's look at an example. So at USAA, we have a origination system for our deposits application, meaning this is how we open new deposit accounts, checking, savings, certificate of deposit accounts at USAA. This is pretty critical, right? Because this is, in a lot of ways, our new member onboarding. A lot of our new members come to us through this banking channel of opening a new USAA account and bringing money to USAA. And so it is an origination system, but it's also a kind of a complex multi-service architecture as well that relies on a lot of dependent downstream systems. So the first thing we did is, and what you see on the right is an assessment of where we were at before we implemented multi-region resiliency with AWS. And you can see both from a disaster recovery and a durability standpoint, and even in the observability space, we were not doing a great job in being resilient and available for our members. And so by implementing a warm standby pattern, failover pattern, we actually reduced our RTO from 4 hours to 30 minutes and our RPO from 1 hour to 5 minutes. If you think about that from a impact to a customer standpoint, in an outage like we had last month, where US East 1 was down, we were able to fail over within 30 minutes and be back up and available for our members to continue to interact with us, to originate new accounts or to be able to access their money. So both from a recovery standpoint and from a data standpoint, the improvements that we saw had a huge business impact in the way that we had a seamless member experience during both this outage and previous outages. So diving a little deeper into kind of what we've learned about, especially the phase 1, which is the architectural and design phase of what we're doing with these teams and where we've seen a lot of benefit, is you can see on the screen here for this application, we have a platform account which handles our network traffic and our routing, but our application being deployed in this US East 1 and US West 2 VPCs regions, we have a duplicate, right? So I mentioned it was a warm standby implementation. We've duplicated the application in both places, and we're using DynamoDB global tables to replicate near real time to our secondary region. So if it was that simple, then we wouldn't have to build in a lot of templates and have blueprints enabled to help make it easier for application engineers. We would just use kind of a global like functions or global resources from AWS, and then we would have our pipeline deployed to both places. But what we found as part of this is it's not as simple as just deploying to both regions. We also have some other considerations to account for. Some of those being item potency as an example, right? So we look at item potency, which just means, can I stand to post something twice, right? Can I stand to have a monetary transaction that posts that to the downstream system more than once? In a lot of cases, especially in the banking space, we can't, right? So we think about that from a within region resiliency perspective. We obviously have to have retries. We have to have our, transaction IDs in our DynamoDB. We have to manage state within a step function, et cetera. But what happens when we fail over during the middle of a step function execution? That state is not maintained as we move to a secondary region. So we have to design around that consideration and make sure that we have resiliency in mind when we're doing that failover procedure as well. So it's part of our architectural design in phase one. It's part of our operational and our run books that we describe in phase two. And then we also have to learn from those experiences when we have errors or we see discrepancies in our final and testing and continuous feedback phase as well. So whether it's item potency or performance degradation, we have cold starts, we have cache rehydration in the secondary region. Accounting for all of those kind of intricacies as part of the design and understanding what that means as far as building a resilient system, not just within one region, but across multiple regions, has been key to understanding how we can be more resilient for our members at USAA. So pulling back up and putting it all together, at USAA, we've now had shifted to 100% of our new applications are going through this resiliency framework, and we're working on kind of reassessing the ones that have already been deployed to AWS to see if they meet that need. As we learned in our last outage, right, there's still opportunities that we have to mature our platform. And in the past, where we had critical applications deployed multi-region, we're shifting to a more conservative strategy and moving more of our applications as we've learned more about how to do it successfully in a multi-region architecture. And like I mentioned kind of at the end there, right, with this example with deposits origination, our architecture and resilience reviews have started to go a lot faster. The more we've learned, the more feedback we've gotten, the more we've understood about the platform and how we need to mature it, the more we've understood about the kind of those nuances and trade-offs related to resiliency architecture, the faster we've gotten, and we've improved not just resilience reviews, but also just architecture reviews. And that reduce in churn has really helped us also prevent resilience-related incidents. So we were able to measure this in this most recent outage. Our resilience-related incidents in a disaster event have gone down by 66%, which again is a huge number and a great benefit to our members as we're allowed to be available to them even when we have outages in US East 1. So in order to get there, we kind of identified our organizational success factors, and they can be broken down into 4 key themes. So first is culture, right? It's a shared responsibility, not just between us as a customer with AWS, but also a shared responsibility between technologists, IT, and our business partners, understanding what resiliency means, what those SLOs should be defined as, so we can build towards that architecture. Leadership, we have to have executive sponsorship and dedicated funding to invest in resiliency as a primary objective. At USAA, we use that, our members as the mission to make sure that we have that mission to meet them where they need to be, and we invest in that. Our approach, we started small. We started with a single application, deploying multi-region. We learned from that, and we scaled with those short feedback loops so we could help improve the maturity of our platform and improve the consistency with the way that we implement resiliency at USAA. And then tooling. I mentioned a couple of the options earlier, but investment in automation and those self-service capabilities, whether it's through blueprints within the SDLC or templates from like an IAC standpoint, making sure that we have the ability for our developers without undue churn or undue toil to be able to implement resilient practices is key as well to making sure that we're going to still meet on our business objectives while providing that excellent member service. So the key takeaways I want you guys to get from the session today is standardization is going to accelerate adoption, right? So whether it's the blueprints or templates I've talked about, you need to reduce the complexity, both from a developer standpoint and from a business standpoint to understand what resiliency means in your organization. And then shift left as much as possible, moving resiliency earlier in your conversations from a project ideation phase and a partnership with your business partners to understand how IT and business work together to make that resiliency strategy work. And then testing must be continuous. We always have to be learning. We can't let outages go to waste. We can't let what we learn from tests, resilience tests, go to waste. We always have to be learning and building confidence through that testing. And then culture and technology have to evolve together. We have to adopt a resiliency mindset, and then we have to use that resiliency mindset to influence the way that we build technology to be able to evolve together for success. Thank you for your time and listening to this talk on USAA's journey to a more resilient architecture in order to support our members' needs. My name is Gregory St. Cyr. If you want to connect with me or if you want to talk more about resiliency, the URL for LinkedIn and the QR code are there. Feel free to reach out. Thank you.